Gemini wealth block exposed. The unconscious pattern sabotaging your abundance and self-worth. Gemini, let me begin with a truth that may feel unsettling the moment you hear it. Your struggle with money has very little to do with money itself. It is not your intelligence, not your talent, not your timing, and not even your discipline. The real tension lives somewhere much quieter, hidden beneath your thoughts, beneath your strategies, beneath the constant movement of your mind. If you are listening to this message today, it is because you have already sensed it. Something invisible keeps interrupting your ability to build, hold, and trust prosperity. You can earn, you can attract opportunities, you can even experience brief surges of abundance, and yet, stability slips through your fingers again and again. Not dramatically, subtly, almost politely. This is not bad luck. This is a pattern. Gemini, your mind was designed to move, to explore, to connect ideas, people, worlds. You were not meant to live a narrow life, and yet, this gift has a shadow that few speak about honestly. When abundance begins to ask something of you, commitment, consistency, identity, something inside you pulls back. Not because you are lazy or irresponsible, but because a deeper fear is activated. Wealth, to you, often feels like a form of enclosure, a definition, a label that says, this is who you are now. And Gemini, nothing frightens you more than being reduced to one version of yourself. Here is the tension you live with. You crave freedom, but you also crave security. You want expansion, but you fear being trapped by success. You imagine abundance as a future where your options increase, yet your nervous system interprets stability as a narrowing of possibility. So you unconsciously keep wealth in motion. You earn it, then disrupt it. You approach structure, then dismantle it. You flirt with long-term plans, then lose interest just as they begin to solidify. This is not sabotage in the dramatic sense. It is avoidance disguised as adaptability. Gate 1 asks us to analyze the core burden, not the surface behaviors, but the emotional logic underneath them. And the core burden for Gemini is this. You learned very early that staying too long in one place, one role, one emotional state was unsafe. Whether through environment, relationships, or internal pressure, movement became your survival strategy. Curiosity protected you. Change kept you alert. Reinvention kept you from being trapped in expectations that did not fit your true nature. Over time, this survival skill became an identity. And identities, when unexamined, quietly run our lives. Wealth, however, requires something Gemini was never taught how to trust. Continuity. Not rigidity. Not boredom, not stagnation, but energetic coherence over time. Money responds not just to brilliance, but to repetition. To staying with something long enough for it to mature. And here is where the unconscious block emerges. When your life begins to stabilize financially, your inner system reads it as a threat. Stability feels like a loss of flexibility. Commitment feels like a loss of identity. Prosperity feels like a demand to choose who you are. And Gemini, choosing oneself, feels like abandoning the others. So the burden is not that you can't focus. The burden is that focus feels like grief. Grief for all the lives you could live, all the paths you could explore, all the versions of yourself that might never be expressed if you commit too deeply to one direction. Wealth, in this sense, becomes emotionally expensive. It asks you to tolerate the discomfort of not becoming everything at once. And your unconscious mind responds by keeping things unfinished, fluid, and reversible. Notice how often your financial life mirrors your inner dialogue. Ideas multiply faster than execution. Plans evolve faster than results. You feel most alive at the beginning, the spark, the possibility, the mental expansion, and most restless at the stage of maintenance. This is not a flaw. It is a signal. A signal that your nervous system is addicted to initiation, not completion. And wealth lives on the other side of completion. At Gate 1, we do not fix anything yet. We simply name the burden honestly. Gemini's wealth block is rooted in a fear of being pinned down by success. A belief that once you arrive, you lose the right to move, to question, to explore. Until this belief is brought into awareness, abundance will continue to hover just close enough to tempt you but never close enough to stay. Pause here, Gemini. Let this land without judgment. Because what comes next is not about forcing discipline or chasing money harder. It is about meeting the part of you that believes chaos is safer than stability and asking whether that belief is still true. Gemini. Gate 2 is where the conversation turns inward. This is not the part where you learn something new. This is the part where you recognize something you have always known but rarely allowed yourself to sit with. The inner mirror does not accuse you. It simply reflects the truth you have learned to move past too quickly. Look closely at your relationship with money, Gemini, and you will notice something subtle but persistent. You do not just want money, you want money to remain light, untethered, optional. You want to know that you could walk away at any moment, reinvent yourself, disappear into another version of life if you chose to. And so you unconsciously design your financial reality to stay temporary. Projects stay flexible, income streams stay scattered, commitments remain open-ended. This is not randomness. This is protection. Your shadow does not fear poverty. It fears containment. It fears the moment abundance asks you to stay, to show up tomorrow as the same person you were today, to carry a role, a reputation, an expectation that does not shift with your mood or curiosity. Somewhere deep inside, wealth is associated with visibility, and visibility is associated with judgment. If you become successful in one direction, people will expect you to continue. They will name you, define you. And Gemini, being defined, feels like being misunderstood. So you create distance between yourself and permanence. You tell yourself you are exploring, keeping options open, not rushing the process. These phrases sound wise, even healthy, and sometimes they are. But in the shadow, they serve another purpose. They keep you from being fully seen in one form. As long as nothing is final, nothing can trap you. Here is the uncomfortable reflection. Chaos feels safer to you than stability, because chaos allows escape. When things are unstable, no one expects consistency from you, including yourself. When money fluctuates, you can always blame circumstances, timing, or energy shifts. But when money stabilizes, it quietly asks a more intimate question. Who are you when you can no longer hide behind potential? Gemini, you are a sign of duality, but the shadow is fragmentation, the belief that you must constantly move between selves to stay alive. In this shadow state, money becomes a threat because it asks for integration. It asks you to bring your ideas, your skills, your identity into one coherent channel, and coherence feels like a narrowing of infinite possibility. Notice how often you romanticize the beginning, the idea stage, the planning stage, the dreaming stage. That is where your mind feels most free. Completion, on the other hand, feels strangely heavy. There is grief in it, because finishing something means you can no longer imagine what it could become. It is something now, and being something means letting go of everything else it is not. Your shadow whispers this lie: if I commit fully, I will lose myself. And so you half commit to protect your multiplicity. But half commitment has consequences. It produces half results, unstable income, and a constant sense that you are capable of more but never quite arriving. The tragedy is not lack, it is proximity. You are always close enough to taste abundance, but not close enough to rest in it. Another mirror reveals itself here. Gemini, you often intellectualize your relationship with money. You analyze it, strategize it, rationalize it. But beneath the thinking lives a nervous system that learns safety through movement. Stillness feels exposed. Consistency feels like being watched. Wealth, in its stable form, requires you to remain present even when nothing new is happening. And that is where the shadow becomes loud. This is why you may unconsciously create distractions just as things begin to work. A new interest appears. A new idea feels urgent. A new problem demands attention, not because you are scattered, but because your system is seeking relief from the pressure of continuity. Disruption becomes self-soothing. Gate 2 is not here to shame you for this. It is here to show you the cost. The cost is exhaustion. The constant starting over. The feeling that you are always rebuilding instead of inhabiting what you've built. The deeper cost is self-doubt, not because you fail, but because you never stay long enough to trust yourself fully. Gemini, the inner mirror, asks only one question at this gate. What part of you believes that staying will destroy your freedom? Until that part is seen, abundance will continue to feel unsafe. Because wealth does not disappear when you look at it, but shadows do. Sit with this reflection. Let it breathe. The next gate is not about force or discipline. It is about alchemy, the transformation of this fear into something that finally works with you, not against you. Gemini, Gate 3 is where everything begins to shift, not because you try harder, but because you stop fighting the wrong battle. Up until now, you may have believed that your wealth block existed because you lacked discipline, structure, or consistency. That belief itself is part of the block. The real issue has never been your ability to commit. It has been what commitment meant to you. Alchemy does not destroy elements. It changes their relationship. And the alchemy required here is not about silencing your many selves, but about creating a container strong enough to hold them without collapse. Wealth does not require you to become one-dimensional. It requires you to become coherent. Boundaries are the missing element in Gemini's financial life. Not boundaries imposed from the outside, but boundaries chosen from within. A boundary is not a prison. It is a vessel. Without a vessel, energy disperses. With a vessel, energy accumulates. Gemini, your ideas are abundant. Your intelligence is abundant. But without containment, abundance never condenses into form. Here is the reframing that changes everything. Commitment is not the death of freedom, it is the protection of meaning. When you commit consciously, you are not saying, "This is the only version of me." You are saying, "This is the version I choose to embody for now." Time-limited devotion is the medicine for your nervous system. Open-ended chaos is no longer required for safety. Alchemy begins when you allow yourself to choose one financial channel as a container, not an identity. One project, one income stream, one long-term structure that you agree to stay with long enough for it to mature. This does not erase your other interests. It simply stops them from hijacking your nervous system every time discomfort arises. Notice how resistance softens when the commitment has edges. Not forever. Not all of you. Just enough. Gemini. You do not fear work, you fear suffocation. So the solution is not more pressure, but clearer edges. A boundary that says, "For this season, I stay." Another layer of alchemy happens when you redefine success. Success is not the moment you arrive. It is the moment you stop running. When you can sit inside a stable income without immediately scanning for exits, something profound happens in your psyche. You realize that freedom does not disappear when you stay, it deepens. Choice becomes embodied rather than imagined. This is where wealth begins to feel safe. Not because the numbers are higher, but because your nervous system is no longer in flight mode. Stability becomes a ground you can stand on, not a trap you must escape. You begin to trust that you can evolve within structure rather than only by abandoning it. Alchemy also requires honesty about distractions. Gemini, not every new idea is a calling. Some are simply exits disguised as inspiration. The boundary you practice here is discernment. Asking not, "Is this exciting?" but "Is this aligned with the container I chose?" This single question can protect months, even years of scattered energy. At Gate 3, wealth stops being something you chase and becomes something you host. And hosting requires space, care, and continuity. You do not have to give up curiosity. You only have to stop letting it decide everything. This is not the end of movement. It is the beginning of direction. Pause here. Feel the difference between a boundary that confines and a boundary that holds. The next gate is where this alchemy leaves the inner world and enters daily life, where presence becomes practice. Gemini, Gate 4, is where insight becomes lived experience, not through dramatic transformation, but through quiet, repeated presence. This is the gate where your relationship with wealth changes, not because you think differently, but because you stay differently. The most practical shift you can make is also the most uncomfortable. Fewer channels, deeper attention. Wealth does not respond to how many directions you can move in. It responds to how fully you inhabit the direction you choose. Gemini, your mind loves stimulation, but prosperity grows from saturation, from returning to the same place, the same effort, the same structure, not because you are trapped, but because you are cultivating. Begin by choosing one financial anchor, not the most exciting one, not the one with the most potential narratives, the one that feels quietly sustainable. This anchor is not your identity. It is your ground. Everything else is allowed to orbit around it, but nothing is allowed to replace it impulsively. Presence is built when your system learns that boredom does not equal danger. You will notice resistance, a restless urge to optimize, pivot, improve, reinvent. Instead of following it immediately, practice delay. Delay is not denial, it is integration. When you delay impulsive change, you give your nervous system time to recalibrate. You discover that most urges to escape dissolve when they are not obeyed instantly. Another practice of presence is staying with results. Gemini, you are excellent at initiating effort, but you often emotionally detach once results appear. You glance at success and move on. Gate 4 asks you to remain with what works, to refine instead of replace, to deepen instead of diversify prematurely. This is how wealth becomes cumulative rather than episodic. Notice how your language begins to shift. Less I could, more I am. Less maybe, more for now. These are not limitations. They are grounding statements that teach your psyche it is safe to exist in one form without losing the rest of yourself. Presence also means allowing visibility. Stable income often brings attention, expectations, recognition, accountability. Instead of escaping, practice inhabiting that visibility consciously. You are not being watched to be judged. You are being seen because you are reliable. And reliability, for Gemini, is a learned skill, not a natural trait, but a powerful one. As you live this change, you will feel something unfamiliar. Calm. Not the excitement of beginnings, but the steadiness of continuation. This calm may initially feel like emptiness. It is not. It is space. Space where trust can grow. Trust in yourself, in your capacity to stay, in your ability to evolve without self-abandonment. Gate 4 does not ask you to become less curious. It asks you to become more present. To discover that freedom does not come from endless movement, but from conscious choice sustained over time. Stay here long enough, Gemini, and wealth will stop feeling like something you chase and start feeling like something that stays with you. Gemini, this is not the end of a lesson. It is the moment where the voice guiding you steps back and something quieter takes over. Nothing here needs to be remembered perfectly. Nothing needs to be applied immediately, because the real shift does not happen through effort, it happens through recognition. You may notice, in the days ahead, a subtle discomfort when things begin to stabilize. A restlessness that whispers, this is where you usually leave. That moment is not a failure, it is a threshold. The wealth block does not break when you push against it. It loosens when you see it clearly and choose not to obey it. There is no promise here of sudden riches, dramatic reversals, or guaranteed outcomes. Wealth is not a reward given for listening. It is a response to who you become willing to remain as. The version of you who no longer equates freedom with fragmentation. The version of you who can stay without disappearing. If something in this message resonated, do not rush to define it. Let it echo. Let it surface in your choices, your pauses, your willingness to remain present when nothing new is happening. Abundance often arrives quietly and only stays when it is not chased. This is where the responsibility returns to you, Gemini, not to act, not to change, but to notice. To observe the moment you usually move on and ask yourself, gently, what if I stayed? That question does not demand an answer today. It only asks for honesty.